What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while that I've posted up a workout, but I wanted to wait till Terrence at least looked like a bodybuilder. Just kidding. But now we are, I don't even know where we're at, 13 weeks out maybe, something like that. Somewhere in the 12-week, 13, 14-week, whatever. Terrence is ahead of pace and looks like he's going to win the Olympia this year, so that's all that matters. And we have a pool day today. We actually have, because Terrence has more than one job, I have more than one job. I have like 12 jobs. We kind of had a little bit of a smushed up split. So we normally have an off day yesterday and we have a arm day the day before, but we had arms yesterday, we have pool today. So we're doing pool minus biceps. So we're just gonna do some back, 1 or 2 rear delts, and that's gonna be it for today. So a little bit more of a condensed pool session than normal. And then again, just some context, he's in a great spot right now. So volume's kind of right around peakish, just low of peakish, again, kind of just auto-regulating a little bit every single day. And for today's video, as we go through, I'm just gonna basically give you one big tip-ish for each exercise. And even at the end, I'm gonna start incorporate some posing tips, just starting with basically maybe one pose a day, just a concept or a tip or something to take away for all you competitors out there, or for anyone that just likes to pose in your bedroom, because you have the Mr. Your Bedroom competition every single night. I get it, I pose for my missus every single night, and she doesn't give a shit, but I still win. I crush the competition in the bedroom where no one else is there. So if you are an actual competitor or a weirdo like me, hopefully you'll like those as well too. But anyway, let's get after it. Hope you guys enjoy and look forward to some more workouts coming soon from now up until Terrence wins the Olympia. All right, guys, so got a little lat training tip for you here. And the simple tip is know your lat anatomy. And from a realistic training standpoint, is know the simplified version of your lat anatomy, and don't let people trying to overcomplicate it confuse you. Because what happens is if you go and read a study or read a book or an anatomy book or whatever, which I've spent lots of money and time reading, you'll get confused because it'll say, what does the lat do? Well, it's a shoulder extensor, it's a shoulder, abductor or adductor, whatever. Someone's gonna get mad that I said that. And all those things really, really simplify to very simple planes. So if we look in this position, like, oh yeah, it's responsible for, shoulder extension, or if it's out here, it's responsible for this kind of adduction-y type thing. But then it's like, well, what is it in here? And what is it in here? And what happens if your arm comes far enough this way? And then it pulls things that way. What direction is this? Oh my gosh, it's a shoulder flexor. So people, I think, very often try and use all that stuff. Some of it is obviously so we know what we're talking about, we're on the same page, but some of it, I think, overly complicates things and just confuses people. So if you have some idea of your lat's broad origin, and sometimes even just exercise specific. So again, if we're trying to do a pull down, we're concerned with the lat fibers, particularly that are down here. And so where is the insertion? Somewhere in the upper arm. What does your lat do? Really the most advanced knowledge, the most advanced anatomy of what your lat does is it pulls those 2 points together. And that can happen when your arm is out front and here and here and here and here and here and here, when it's back here, whatever. If you understand that all it does is pull these points together, you're actually gonna know anatomy better than the people that memorize the anatomy books. So I say all that, so when you're doing stuff, just realize that's all you're trying to do from a training standpoint, is pull those 2 points together and do it in something that makes sense in alignment of the load you're using. Now, over this past weekend, I got reminded by one of my good mentors, Tom Purvis, not everything that you experiment with is something you have to do all the time. And so sometimes when I'm training Terrence, I'm training myself, I get caught in the boxes of just doing things exactly the same every single week, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. So I have an adequate baseline or an accurate baseline to compare to as we go week to week. Am I making progress? Can't change things constantly. That being said, you can use times for your warm-up set to mess around and do things different ways. You can actually change things maybe from training block to training block. You can revisit a form at some point in time that maybe you've stopped doing. And specific to lats, one of the ones I was messing around with just on my warm-up sets with today was spine position. You'll have some people talk about, okay, it's responsible, of course, for what the shoulder joint's doing. It's responsible a lot in turn for what the scapula is doing. but it crosses over your spine as well too. So to some degree, it's responsible for what your spine is doing. Some people will try and tell you how important that is or isn't. The thing that I'm trying to remind myself is it's as important it is to the person trying it. So it's worth messing around with. You'll see that we were kind of leaned forward. Terrence is in a similar spot, relatively what I would call a neutral spine, and just pulling that upper arm right into that side, intent of pulling down this way. Over the weekend, I was messing around with actually being a little bit more extended, really trying to actually maybe even extend, side bend, drive that elbow back in there. And again, if we're doing a little bit of side bending, if we're doing a little bit of extending, I don't need someone online to tell me what the data says. I can tell these 2 points went closer together. So from where we were finished before, now Terrence is going to pull back. He's going to extend. So go ahead and pull down actually, and then extend your back, kind of crunch a little to the side. Those points got closer together. Now again, what does that mean? Am I saying that way is better than the way we were doing it? No, but it's worth trying. It's worth messing around with, and kind of like Tom was saying, it's worth having those options. So not doing the exact same thing every single time. It's worth messing around with different positions. And if for no other reason, I was liking messing around with that today, because as I was finishing all my warm-up sets, it was giving me a little bit more of a stronger contraction-y sensation, because again, regardless of what somebody wants to say, as those points get closer together, that is a shorter lat. And then when I went into my working sets, I went back into the position that I'm kind of used to and comfortable with. So that's your little lesson for pull downs today. Know your anatomy, keep it simple, which actually makes you know anatomy better than people that memorize anatomy books. And then don't be afraid to mess around with stuff. And again, just if for no other reason, to mess around with some different sensations, some different feelings, some different whatever, and realize you don't have to do anything with it. You can mess around with all that stuff I just said, and maybe you only feel oblique stuff, you only feel QL stuff, you don't feel any lat stuff, then don't use it. It's not black and white, right or wrong, something that everybody has to do that way. So give those tips a try, and let me know how you feel your next pull down. Come on now. Let's go. Again, I got you. Come on. New finish. One more. Come on. Finish. All right, guys. Real quick tip when you're doing, this really could apply to any chest supported row. I'm on a TBar row, obviously, we're doing here. But I think just like any exercise, arguably even more here, a lot of people mess up the end ranges of motion. What I mean by the ends is basically the transitions. So when you're going from the bottom of the eccentric into the concentric, or when you're getting up to the top of the concentric into the eccentric, I think those are the places that people mess up the most. So if nothing else, make use of your warm-up times to just really practice those positions. And I honestly say make sure you do it even without the weight. Even if you literally take 10 seconds to do this, it'll probably help. Start the motion, just literally protract as far as you can, because that's where you want to go. If you can actively protract there, go. Visualize those shoulder blades wrapping around, opening up around your rib cage. Just feel that spot and say, oh, there's that. Feel your upper back pulling you out of that position as opposed to bouncing. And then as you're coming up, I even half time, as you can see I'm doing, close my eyes, pull my shoulder blades as far back as I can. I'm not thinking about my hands. I'm not thinking about a bar. I'm not even really thinking too much about my elbows, although they're going to go really far back. I'm just thinking, how far back can I pinch my shoulder blades? And once I'm there, think about that. Think about the muscles that are there. Think what that position feels like. Spend a second there, and then just rehearse it. Well, you can obviously, there's nothing set in stone. Do it a couple times if you want. But even on my warm-up sets, when I got a plate, I got 2 plates. For every rep, I pause, stretched, I pause, contracted, and I really feel like, am I ending this with muscles? Am I starting this with muscles, upper back muscles? Am I finishing this? Am I actually getting there? Am I just kind of bouncing in and out of the top? And hopefully the idea is, that's the point the whole time, and when you actually get in and work hard, will it be as neat and clean as pretty? Probably not. But will some of that feeling actually transfer into better performance, using more weight and actually using it more for your muscles? Hopefully so. So give that tip a go. Any row is going to work well, but obviously doing it on TBar rows today. And if it helps you feel your back more and get you more jacked, let me know. I want to hear about it. Real quick tip for the RDL. Two things. One, arguably, if you really like naming stuff, first and foremost, it is a hip exercise. I do have it on our back day. I'm not confused, I promise. Because hips, yes, are the prime mover, the ones getting the most joint torque, but every single one of your vertebrae, basically in between your arms and the base of your pelvis, is also a joint, so it's next in line for the most torque. So I say all that because, again, it's a hip exercise, it's a huge back challenge exercise. It's not a where are your hands, where do the plates end up exercise. So as far as determining range of motion, take your time to figure out where your hips can go. It is your hips that will dictate the end of the range of motion. So really easy stuff is, again, just hip flexing, whether we're talking about one of the million cues you can use as far as how far back will your hips go with a given knee bend. This is my end. All right, and so where everything ends up from there after that point is completely arbitrary. The distance that bar is, again, the line of force from that bar is horizontally from your hips, as well as the range of motion at the hips, will determine how much challenge is at the hips and in turn all the erectors. Hopefully it shouldn't be too hard, although it still eludes people. When I do these, if you watch when I do them, the plates touch the ground. So people that are concerned about full range of motion, tell me I'm a good person because my plates touch the ground. But one, someone should hopefully think that the radius of a plate is completely arbitrary. So there's arbitrary number one. And the next two big limbs that determine how low those plates go is going to be arm length. The longer your arms, the lower the plates will go. And leg length. The shorter your legs, the lower the plates will go, or the longer your legs, the higher up you'll be. So you'll see, even if I had the same things going on at the hips, by a bunch of completely arbitrary stuff, people will judge people for their range of motion. So even if you watch Terrence when he does these, he stops, I believe his plates are, I don't know, half an inch off the ground, which he's half an inch away from being a good person. Unfortunately, he's not, according to the range of motion police. But if you actually looked at his spine angle relative to the ground, which is something I'm concerned about for back stimulus, and also his hips, I'm pretty positive his hip angle is actually more closed than mine. So arguably he's going through more range of motion of the actual trained joint. So when determining your range of motion, do it without the bar, without the load, which can pull anyone much lower than they should be, and you'll determine where you should end up. And again, two things can happen here. One, you might, like Terrence, end up half an inch off the ground, and that's perfectly fine. Again, unless you're concerned about competing in the plates have to touch the ground when you do RDL Olympics. I'm not sure if that's an event. Or what could happen on the other side of that is you could actually have to go lower. So if you push your hips back and actually see where things are, there are people that are cutting their full range of motion short because of arbitrary leg length, arm length, plate length, or plate radius, and they should actually be standing on a box or using smaller plates or something so they could actually get more range of motion at the hips. So listen to the hips. What does Shakira say there? I'm on tonight, you know my hips don't lie. Hips don't lie. Shakira knew it was up. Trevor's going to put that audio in right here. We're going to get the rights to it. We probably won't get the rights to it. Just imagine it's playing. Put it on your own phone and listen to it while you're watching this video. It'll make it so much better. Listen to your hips. That'll determine your range of motion. All that other stuff, arbitrary stuff, the people that determine the plate circumference, diameter, radius, they weren't considering your hips when you were doing RDLs. So let your body dictate your range of motion and not some arbitrary stuff. All right, guys, so last little tip here that I just want to clarify. Someone's going to ask why the superset here. Why are we doing RDLs on back day? Someone's going to think I skipped out on my TikTok university education because that's where all education comes from. Someone's going to tell me that traditional concentric eccentric style training is superior to isometrics for hypertrophy. Someone's going to tell me that supersets are inferior to straight sets, and I can't believe I don't know that. It's almost like I would probably have that information and still made decisions based off of reading a piece of paper that somebody wrote that wasn't training Terrence. Weird stuff. But anyway, based on the fact that doing RDLs does provide a ridiculous amount of stimulus to the erectors, and based on the anecdotal evidence of results with a very large population have actually applied to, it works really freaking well for getting ginormous erectors. And I do agree that doing traditional concentric eccentric style training also works very well for erectors. So I do this weird thing from someone that actually trains people. I make a decision based off concepts and I apply it to a human being and I see what happens. So I combine the best of both worlds. We go from an RDL straight into a low back extension. We take a little bit of a breakish in between anyway, not really a pure superset. So if anyone's actually done this, if you want erectors that look like Terrence, you do some RDLs with 365 with perfect form, you go straight over in this and take it to failure. it works pretty damn well. Or you can sit behind your thumbs and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about as well too. So a very practical standpoint and practical way to get some giant erectors, kind of just basing off of, yes, concepts and principles, but actually applying it to human beings. This is how I've come to doing this little setup here, which isn't rocket science in any way, shape, or form. Someone surely has done this before me. Works really, really well. And then over time, we do this weird thing where we track them and we progress them. So as RDLs keep getting stronger, the load we handle here keeps getting stronger, and lo and behold, erectors keep getting bigger. Someone else, we only did one round of this. I'm going to write how many sets we did on everywhere. We only do one set. Someone will say, is one set enough? Ask Terrence's erectors. If they could talk, they would tell you it's enough. So again, same thing. If you're at home and you're wondering if one set is enough, and right now, hypothetically, I'm just guessing, you can RDL 95 pounds. You can do this after that with a broomstick. And over time, you progress to doing one set of 495 for 10 pounds or for 10 reps. And you can do this with, 135. You're probably going to have some pretty big erectors only doing one set. So give this a go if you want some giant erectors and a big, thick back. Not saying this is going to do much for upper back or lats or anything like that, but for erectors, all that shit that runs along your spine, this will make them meaty. Enjoy. All right, guys, last little tip for any rear delt movement that you're doing. A lot of the principles that I talk about for every single exercise, of course, I think apply and will always apply. So we talk about bracing and profiles and alignment, but just from a practical standpoint, some of those things, those principles are a little bit more important for some body parts than others. And one of that is rear delts. I think alignment is by far the most important. And literally it's a matter of the shoulder, essentially, for lack of a better word, is just hypermobile. It has so much range of motion and can go through so much range of motion and do so many things and has so many muscles that cross over it that can technically do a lot more than just their textbook motions, that the biggest battle with the rear delt is actually just alignment, actually getting the line of force that you're using and the plane of motion that you're moving in, all that stuff lining up nicely. And then it's just a result because the muscle itself is small. And I'm talking even for someone that's massive and has technically massive rear delts, it's still a very small muscle relative to a quad or something. And especially a quad, example, a quad that goes through a hinge joint, no one ever goes on leg extensions and they can't find their quad. So again, it's tougher just to find your rear delts in the first place. So whether it's a dumbbell or a cable or a machine, you guys have seen, I like to use all of them at some point in time. But cables are, to a certain degree, kind of hard to beat because you have so much versatility. So you can do some things where you could go higher to lower, you could go more straight on plane, you could even, I'm saying that you want to do this, go lower to higher, but everyone's delts are a little bit different. How they actually wrap around the joint is a little bit different. So again, having the versatility to not try and manipulate yourself in a machine, even something like a pec deck, which is an exercise that I like to use, still loses that because you really have to fit yourself in there, where here you've got a lot of very good options. So again, if you struggle with your rear delts, I would recommend maybe trying to go to cables, give them really a shot, mess around with some different things. Don't feel like you have to do, I have to do this position, I have to do this position. Try all of them because again, literally it's one of those things where there's some things that are very similar from person to person as far as where things are and how things insert. But muscle bellies of the delts are not one of those things. They are gonna vary different drastically from person to person. So find what really feels good for you on these. Make sure you're hitting that target first. And then like lots of other stuff, you can start to think maybe bracing, you can start to think about progressing them over time and things like that. All right, guys, so as promised, I'm gonna go through a relatively quick tutorial here of a front double bicep. I was hoping to find somebody pretty decent at posing to help demo, but you got what you got. But so again, keeping it quick, there's a whole bunch of stuff that could go into this, like anything. So I'm gonna give you guys the big stuff. So we're gonna do a front double bicep. Figure that's a pretty good place to start because whether you wanna compete or don't wanna compete, you gotta be able to hit a front double bicep. That's like the pose. So first things first, again, especially if you're new, especially if you are thinking about competing, put yourself in the best positions possible to not look bad. And so I say one of the number one mistakes that amateurs make and new people make is they'll see someone like Terrence, they'll see someone like Frank Zane, they'll see how they hit like a front double bicep and try and replicate that immediately. And I always say the less balanced and the less perfect your physique is, the more balanced and symmetrical your poses need to be. So you'll see a lot of people that can get away with a leg here, a twist here, a tilt to the side. The only way you can get away with all that stuff is if you have a pretty much perfect physique. If your physique isn't that great, the more stuff you do, the worse you look. So we're gonna start with basically a pretty balanced pose here. So first thing you wanna do, and if you're new to posing, is set your legs. Almost every single pose is set the legs. And some poses, certain body parts are more important than condition for others. So in the front double bicep, really the only thing they're looking at for conditioning is your legs. So when I say set your legs, you find a position where you're able to flex and separate your quads as much as possible. And you pick a width basically where your thighs are still touching. Now again, from there, getting a little advanced, you can maybe even externally rotate a little bit at your hips, kind of as you see as Terrence just naturally as he sets his quads, they turn out a little bit, looks good for sweep. But don't go nuts here. Some people, if you don't have sweep, don't try and make it look like you have sweep. So some people will go super wide, in which case you got a thigh gap, and that doesn't look great. And even some people, when they touch their thigh gap so they don't have it, to try and look like sweep, they really externally rotate even when they're touching, in which case you want to see the quads from the front. You don't want to see the adductors. So thighs should be touching, tense the quads, separate them if the conditioning's there, and if anything, a little bit of external rotation at the hips, which just means turn that femur, turn your upper leg out. That can start from the feet, can be a pretty good place to start. From there, it's basically when you're doing your upper body, you're thinking much more just about occupying space. So you should be reaching wide with hands, wide with elbows, and even as you set into the pose, kind of having your shoulder blades pulled apart. Because again, really, if you could, you want these two parts as far apart as possible. Having your shoulder blades pulled forward. People think, oh, I gotta flex my lats on this. You're really not flexing your lats. That's flex lats. Doesn't look fantastic. If anything, you're protracting your shoulder blades, pulling your shoulder blades forward a lot, standing with a nice tall posture, flexing your biceps, messing around with obviously what looks good there. You're too wide, you're gonna have a gap. You're closed up too far, you're losing a little bit of that width. So find your happy balance. I'll let Terrence relax for a second. And that's really what you're thinking as far as upper body, what your shoulder blades, your shoulders are doing is getting nice and wide. And the last thing that's honestly personal preference is what you do with your waist. You're generally gonna see three different things now. Someone will hit a vacuum, someone will basically just stay nice and tall, but not a vacuum, and some will actually kind of crunch down on the abs. My preference is the first two, where people will actually either vacuum. You gonna do it, Terrence? Can we do it?
Yeah. Oh, we're doing basic.
Yeah, so we'll do that. We'll talk about that for 1 minute. So slight vacuum, it looks really good. Then just one where you're up nice and tall without the vacuum. So that's what I meant by option number 2. And then some people will actually kind of crunch down a little bit because they actually like to show off the abs a little. And honestly, some people look good like that. In general, the people that look good like that are massive. I would say generally people that are bigger where this, if they do this, because what happens when most normal people crunch down, you lose a little bit of the appearance of that width and that size. And if you're giant and you're massive, sometimes you can get away with that and you are more concerned about trying to show some conditioning. Most people are gonna look better with option 1 or option 2, in my opinion. And then the only last thing I'll just mention, just because Terrence did it naturally, someone's gonna say, well, why don't I do this with my legs? Lots of guys do it. Like I said, if you've got a pretty good physique, then you can start to mess around with some options with the legs. So Terrence will show you what he has, which is just a little step out. Most people, the big mistake they do is they put a foot way too far forward or way too far back. You definitely want to start just stepping that leg straight out, because the tip on there is whatever foot goes forward, that quad looks bigger, this quad looks smaller. So start with them nice and even. And then some people, Terrence can even show a little twist or tilt or whatever. I don't do this stuff because I'm not that pretty. But you can even mess around. You'll see a little twist of the hip, leg forward, little twist through the upper body. And that looks good if you're Terrence. If you're watching this at home, odds are you're not Terrence. But still, honestly, feel free to mess around with the initial stuff we gave there. Should be the basic place to start. Again, this is coming from someone that looked like an idiot the first time I was on stage posing. Those tips will help you not look like an idiot. And then you can add a little bit of that stuff in if you really want to kind of mess around. But just keep that in mind. The more advanced you go, the more tissue you have, the more balance you have, the more you can do that type of stuff. But if you're kind of new to posing, maybe stick with the basics. Overall, hope you guys enjoy the workout. And we'll do something like this again for our next one, push day, whatever. Thanks, Terrence.
And if you have small calves, wear long socks.
Yes.
Boom.
Pro tip.